Over the weekend of June 22nd, 2007, one of the most shocking events in wrestling history took place.
Well, the wrestling world in shock today. Former champion Chris Benoit found dead in his Atlanta home along with his wife and young son.
Professional wrestler Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel were found dead in their home at Atlanta, Georgia. At first, the family appeared to be the victim of a possible home invasion or robbery. The WWE ran a tribute episode on Monday night, Raw, in honor of their fallen friend. It was supposed to be a night to celebrate and honor the career of one of the greatest performers of his generation. During the investigation, more facts about what had happened at the Benoit home came to light. Over the course of the fateful weekend, Chris Benoit murdered his wife and son before hanging himself in his home gym. WWE quickly changed their stand, and the next night on their broadcast, Vince McMahon, the co-founder of WWE, made a speech addressing the situation and made it clear that Chris would not be mentioned on their program again. His name was removed from their website, and the company had done much to distance themselves from him. The tragedy sparked a debate over what could have caused one of the most respected wrestlers of his time to do such a horrible thing. Let us take a look into the mind of Chris Benoit, the wrestling superstar who turned insane. I'm Anaamika. Welcome to my world of mystery and anonymity, to the world of those stories that lie in wait around us, leaving us with unanswered questions that echo relentlessly through our thoughts, as if in an unbreakable magnetic loop. Join me on this expedition as we peel back the layers of these enigmas, diving into the uncharted waters of our world's most perplexing stories. Our story begins with Chris Benoit's rise to fame. Born in Montreal, Canada on May 21, 1967, from an early age he displayed a passion for wrestling. Chris' father says that Chris was a very obsessive young boy, thinking about nothing other than wrestling for the majority of his childhood. While most kids were out playing with their friends, climbing trees and getting into trouble, Chris stayed home to train, learn and soak up every wrestling match he could find on TV. With his intense work ethic, Benoit soon became one of the most popular names in professional wrestling and earned the nickname the Rabid Wolverine for his ferocity in the ring. If you were following professional wrestling in the 90s and early 2000s, you definitely knew who Chris Benoit was. With a career spanning over 20 years, he was one of the biggest names in wrestling back in those times. His wrestling career was a testament to his dedication. Benoit married twice. He had 2 children with his first wife, Martina. By 1997, that marriage had broken down. Then Benoit started living with Nancy Sullivan, who also was a professional wrestler. On February 25, 2000, Chris and Nancy were gifted with a son named Daniel, and on November 23, 2000, Chris and Nancy married. It was Nancy's 3rd marriage. All was going well for Benoit professionally, but issues started arising in his personal life. Within just 3 years, Nancy filed a divorce from Benoit, citing the wedding as irrevocably broken. According to Nancy, Chris was prone to violent outbursts and would throw furniture and break things when he lost his temper. She later dropped the lawsuit as well as the restraining order that she had filed. This would prove to be a terrible mistake. June 24, 2007. In the days leading up to the crime, nothing was unusual. The Benoit family went about their daily routines like they always did. Chris followed all of his usual training routines, but for reasons that remain unclear, June 24th would be the day that Chris would reach his breaking point. The day before the revelation that shook the entire wrestling community, Chris made a call to his friend Chao, leaving a voicemail that explained that both Nancy and Daniel had food poisoning. He was explaining that he would be late for that night's show in Texas. Chao noticed something was off about the call and his tone and asked Chris if he was okay. "Chao, I love you," said Chris and hung up the phone. On June 24th morning, just before 4 a.m., Chris sent out text messages to several of his co-workers. The content of these messages was a bit strange. The messages only contained Benoit's home address, a mention of the family's dogs being enclosed near the family pool, as well as a garage door being left open. No one knew what to make of these texts. A few of Nancy's co-workers would receive the same message. Chao was woken up by these texts, but he put his phone down and went back to sleep, thinking nothing of it, expecting to meet Chris for his fight later that morning. But Chris never showed up. It would be the following day when a major wrestling event was scheduled to take place in Texas. Chris was scheduled to be one of the main competitors, but he never arrived at the event. The program coordinators were suspicious as the morning passed by without any sighting of Chris. As the day progressed, several people became agitated by Chris' lack of attendance. But by 3 p.m. that afternoon, this agitation turned into fear. They decided it was time to call the police for a welfare check.
I run the security for World Wrestling, and one of our wrestlers that lives down there is missing, and he told me to say we need a welfare check done.
Okay, what's the address?
130 Green Meadow Lane.
The police officers decided to drop by the Benoit residence. They had found Chris, his wife, and their son inside the house, but none of them were alive. When officers arrived at the Benoit home, it was immediately classified as a major crime scene. The details of the crime were a bit confusing at first, as investigators had no idea who could have done such a thing. They found that Nancy had been tied up before losing her life. Her hands had been bound with a television cable and her feet had been taped together. As they continued to search the scene of the crime for clues, they found a sock in a trash can that had been covered in dried biological fluids, suggesting that it had been shoved inside Nancy's throat to silence her before her death. They then discovered something far worse. As they searched the rest of the home, they found Chris' young son, only 7-year-old. He had also lost his life and was found lying on his bed. Soon after, they found Chris. Chris had lost his life after being hanged from one of his pieces of gym equipment in the family's workout room. This is what helped investigators piece together what had taken place here, as it didn't appear as though Chris had been placed here against his will. All of the evidence suggested that Chris had done this to himself. It wouldn't be until several days later that the clues from the investigation would all fit together. Chris' first wife received a package in the mail. Inside were several of Chris' belongings, including a Bible with a knot that had been placed inside. The contents of this knot haven't been made public, but investigators did release one key detail. Chris had witnessed the homicide of his family, and he knew exactly who the killer was. That's because it was him. As far as the evidence took them, there was truly no reason to commit such a heinous and senseless crime. Chris had everything going for him: an incredible career, a wife that he loved, and a son that he adored. The actual murders and suicide took place over a 3-day period. First, Benoit strangled Nancy. The next day, he smothered Daniel with a pillow, having administered Xanax to him so that he did not feel any pain. Then, a day after that, Benoit went downstairs to his home gym, tied a cable around his neck, put it on the highest weight and let go, breaking his neck instantly. He did this after making 2 final searches on his home computer. The first was a passage from the Bible where a son is resurrected, and the second was the fastest and least painful way to break your neck. So why would he do such a thing? To this day, no one really understands why. The police on investigating could not find any motive, but there are a few explanations. There was not one particular reason, but many factors that may have contributed to the actions that Benoit took that evening. Steroid use was something that was fairly common in professional wrestling back in those days, and Chris was known to abuse steroids his entire career. At the time of his death, it was revealed that Chris Benoit's body contained 10 times the normal levels of testosterone, which is incredibly high for any normal man, and it is a huge indication that Benoit was abusing steroids at the end of his life. His heart had swollen to 3 times that of the normal man. The discovery of Benoit's steroid abuse led many, especially the mainstream media, to believe that roid rage was the reason Benoit snapped and murdered his family. Roid rage can be explained as an outburst of anger, aggression, or violence caused by the abuse of anabolic steroids. However, Benoit's father thinks it was another element of wrestling which was responsible for Benoit's downfall, namely head trauma. Chris Benoit suffered a number of concussions during his long wrestling career. During his time in the ring, it was not uncommon for wrestlers to take unprotected chair shots to the head or to take no time off from a concussion. Benoit himself had told his friends that he had suffered more concussions than he could count. After his death, the Department of Neurosurgery at West Virginia University studied Chris Benoit's brain and found that at the time of his death, Benoit had the brain of an 80-year-old suffering from severe Alzheimer's disease. While we can't know for sure that this brain damage is the reason Benoit did what he did, it is sure to have affected his thinking. There is no evidence to suggest that Chris had any idea the amount of danger his career put him in. All he knew is that he was putting on shows for thousands of fans by portraying this larger-than-life character who was known worldwide for being the toughest of tough guys. He had no idea that he was damaging his own brain day after day. The science and research surrounding repeated concussions like this simply didn't exist back then, and the few studies that had been carried out weren't nearly as widely recognized as they are today. There was rampant steroid and drug use in the industry, which was taken as granted, and the side effects of which were not as well known as it is today. All of this, combined with psychological issues and alcohol abuse, turned Chris into a ticking time bomb. So, at the end of it all, was Chris a monster or a victim? The stories don't end here. Join me in this journey every Saturday at 9 p.m. to dive deep into the shadows, uncovering the tales that send shivers down your spine. If you're ready to embark on a journey into the unknown, hit that subscribe button and join our community of fellow mystery enthusiasts. Buckle up, because it's about to get mysterious in here.